Okay, here we go. Today I'm going to be talking about my techniques that I used to learn to build a curved trestle. This was the first time I scratch built something, and I got a lot of support from Dwayne Richardson and Mike Mackey in guiding me to make it. I was fortunate enough to get it completed and get it entered in the Round Rock Convention, and it received a first place blue ribbon in the convention. So I call that beginner's luck, I guess. The overview of the curved trestle was it was built in HO scale for my freelance Lone Star division of the L&N Louisville and Nashville Railroad. It's 52 feet long and 38 feet high with a slight curve in it. And there's no specific prototype for it, but it's very representative of the trestles in the Middle and East Tennessee area. The trestle consists of 6 bents. 5 of them are 3 stories high. 1 is 2-story high. And I brought an example, or I brought the trestle with me, and I'll put it up here. Actually, I'll just pass it around. So that's the side view, of course, of it. And here's the top view, and it doesn't show up very well, but there is a very slight curve in it. Before I started, since I was a rookie at this, or a neophyte at this, before I started, I did some research and took advantage of my NMRA membership and went to the website and pulled up information on the data sheets. And I found 2 that were very, very helpful. First was the one on trestle deck systems, which talked about components of an open deck trestle. It talked about sizes and number of stringers, and that was extremely helpful in determining my approach on this thing and how I was going to build it. The other area I looked at was the general construction. It shows typical bents for a 4-column bent as well as a 5-column 2-story bent, and it gives you all the data information for it. So I would encourage other people who are building, maybe building for the first time, whether it be a flat car, a trestle, a building, whatever, go to the NMRA website and look at the data sheets. They can be very helpful. Before we get started on the construction techniques, I thought I'd talk about definitions. Obviously, this is a bent, and we've had a lot of discussion about a bent so far. But a bent is made up of many, many different members. And the first member of a bent is called a column, and unfortunately this is not showing up, but that's the tall vertical member of a trestle. And there's usually 4 or 5 columns, and they meet at a member called a cap. Then there are horizontal members of a trestle, and those are called sashes. And then there are sway braces that connect the sashes and support the columns to prevent swaying of the trestle. All of these are connected. All the connections are made with nut bolt washer assemblies. The slang is NBWs. And you heard Dwayne talk about his trestle with 1,700 different NBWs. There's, I think, 450 or 480 NBWs in this trestle right here. So they do add up quickly, and it gets a little tedious, but they're well worth the effort. Okay, so we've talked about columns, we've talked about caps, we've talked about sway braces, sashes. Now, on top of the cap, there rests a member called a stringer, and these stringers run the full length of the trestle. And then on top of the trestle, there are ties, and of course the rail is spiked into the ties, and then there's guardrails generally on the outside of the ties that are connected to the ties by NBWs. My construction took place. This trestle is constructed with columns that are 12 by 12, girts that are 4 by 8, sway braces that are 4 by 10, stringers that are 12 by 14, and that was really composed of 3 4-inch by 14-inch pieces of strip wood. Then sashes were 4 by 10 and bridge ties were 8 by 8. And again, I got that off from the data sheet. One thing I did not mention about girts on the girts connect the 3 center columns of different bents as they go down, as it goes down the trestle. That was something I learned from the data sheet. All the strip wood was pre-stained black and sepia ink mixed with isopropyl alcohol and for this trestle. My approach on this, and there's many other approaches, but I already had the track and ravine was already on the layout. So my approach was to take a piece of tracing paper and make a tracing of the rails, carefully noting where the trestle started, where the trestle ended. And then I took that tracing and I mounted it to foam board so that I could use push pins to help shape the strip wood and get the contour of the rail. The trestle deck was made, as I had mentioned, the stringers were made of 3 4 by 14-inch pieces of strip wood. They were carefully bent, and this is an example of my tracing that I made mounted to a foam board. This is not the one I made for this trestle that I was passing around, but it's similar. And you can see it's pretty straightforward, and that's what I'm calling foam board. I don't know if it's worth passing around the room or not. So I took and carefully bent and pinned each stringer to follow the tracing on the form, or to follow the rail on the tracing. And then once I was satisfied with the contour of that first stringer, I took the two outer stringers off, applied glue to the center stringer again, put in the 2 pieces of strip wood, 2 outer pieces of strip wood, repinned it, and I've got my one stringer contoured to the tracing. Then I repeated that for the second rail, and then I glued several groups of bridge ties together, and this is an example of that. This is a kind of a training aid I made up for the presentation. I glued 4 or 5 sets of bridge ties to those curved stringers, and after the glue dried, it maintained its shape, and I took it off the template, and then I carefully added the remaining bridge ties to it, equally spacing them along the stringer, and then I added guardrails and NBWs to the trestle deck. Moving on to the bed construction, Mike Mackey loaned me his fixture, and this allows you to make 2 trestle bents at one time. And my approach on this thing was to take and put the cap in first, and then lay it in the various columns, and then I put the sashes in, followed by the sway braces on one side, allowed that to dry, and then I flipped the bent over and applied the other sashes and other sway braces to the other side of the bent, and then set that aside to dry. And I built the required number of bents, and I was in pretty good shape. I did, as the bents came off the template, I added NBWs too to both sides of the connection. The final assembly and finishing of the trestle, I started off with the 2 end bents, and I glued that to the trestle deck. And then I went ahead and added the remaining bents that were, and I spaced them evenly along the trestle. The girts were added, between each bent for the 3 inner columns, and sashes, and then NBAWs were added to each of those girts. I used Code 100 rail, and I took the Code 100 rail, I glued it and spiked it to the bridge ties, and then I used for the second rail, I used a 3-point track gauge to locate the second rail, again gluing and spiking it in place. One thing I did that I kind of regret is I used some Code 100 or some pretty good sized spikes to glue to spike those rails in, and I should have used something smaller like a Code 70 or even smaller. Try to use the smallest track spikes possible. The bridge rail that I built is Code 83 rail. It was bent, weathered, and then glued and spiked in place also. And the galvanized metal on the, if you notice on the bridge ties and on the top of the fence, they're covered with galvanized metal. And this is a Dwayne Richardson suggestion. I took foil candy wrappers, smoothed out the wrinkles, painted them gray, then dry brushed them black and rust on them to give them that weathered look, and applied it over the vents as well as the end of the bridge ties.
Any particular brand of candy?
No, I kind of mixed Dove candy wrappers that I gave my wife for Valentine's Day with some other foil, and they didn't fight too much as they were being smoothed out on the thing. Mike,
what's the purpose of putting that on there?
well, the purpose is to create
In real life.
In real life is to keep the cinders and other stuff from steam locomotives from burning down the trestle. That's my understanding. Any other questions or comments? I know there's been a lot of discussion on various types of trestles and things like that, so I mean, this is my interpretation of how to build a trestle. There's 1,000 ways of doing these things, but this seemed to work out pretty well for me. And that's the end.
Dick, on the construction of your bench where you're gluing wood to wood, you just use just a usual wood glue?
I used Northeast that pink flamingo glue on it. Sorry.
Why would that be different than a normal wood glue, the kind of yellow wood glue?
Well, yellow wood glue I don't think dries. I don't use yellow wood glue because I don't think it dries completely clear. But this pink flamingo stuff does.
Does it?
It's been my impression.
I've played around with different wood things, and what I've noticed is, at least with the yellow wood glue and CA adhesive, wherever you have that, if you don't wipe it off real good, it just doesn't take a stain if you stain after the fact, after you put it together.
There's a couple things there. Always stain your wood before you glue it together. And this is coming from, I learned this the hard way building furniture. If you get squeeze out, never wipe it off. Let it dry and cut it off. If you wipe it off, you're shoving the glue down into the fibers of the wood and you seal it, and then it won't take stain. Okay? So one of the reasons why the pink flamingo glue works really well, it and Aleen's are basically canopy glue. They dry really clear and it's a flexible joint. On a prototype railroad, most bridges, especially the old wooden ones, you had to slow work. You had to slow way down and then creep out onto the trestle, ease yourself across it, and move on. In fact, I was just watching a video on the West Side Lumber Company, and they were talking, they had a water tank set at the end of one trestle. They had to pull up, stop, cut off, back up, or go forward, water the locomotive, back up across the trestle, hook the train back up, and then leave, because if you were sitting on the other side of the trestle, the force of slack running out and everything trying to get the train moving again would pull the trestle down. If you hit one at high speed, the inertia of it could pull the trestle down. So with those old woodwoods, and that's why so many of them are cross-braced to keep it from racking. With going with a pink flamingo or the Aleen's tacky, it's a flexible joint, so if you actually have a little bit of weight, like a big heavy brass engine, it can sway a little bit without causing problems. If you go with a hard carpenter's glue, it's a very stiff joint, and You know, it's not gonna come apart on you, but it just, it gives you a little bit of flexibility if you use the other.
Well, I had thought that if you stained it first, the glue might not get down to the pores well enough to stick it together.
Yeah, no,
Not the
it
case.
would do just fine. It doesn't seal it at all. In fact, usually what I do is I'll take whatever stain I'm using and I'll put it into a rag, lay the strip wood into it, and then pull the strip wood through. Don't try to shove it back through, it's just gonna bind and break. Lay it in, pull it through. I know something like Sierra West, when he does his stuff, he always talks about, you know, make a little tank and pour all the stuff in it and sit all the strip wood in it and just let it soak, and then to me, that's getting it too wet and you're worried about fighting warpage. It works, and it's a technique that works for him, and he has beautiful models, so it's hard to argue. But yeah, for me, just to wipe it on, make sure you hit the ends and set it aside. If you're mixing colors, put it in a bottle where you can seal it, because when you start making cuts on all your pieces, you've now got all those little end spots you need to go back in and touch up. And if you've mixed it, it's hard to touch it and go back and get the exact same color again. So always save some stain from your mix to do that.
I would add to that, if you're using an alcohol-based stain with no water, it doesn't cause any warpage.
Yeah.
I put a batch of ties in and forgot about it, came back a month later and poured them out. They were all perfect.
Yeah.
Just a little dark.
That's why when you're mixing all these things like alcohol and any ink, try to use the highest version of alcohol to water ratio you can find. I think the standard bottle at Walmart for 50 cents is like 80-20 or something like that. They actually make a 90-10 or 93-7.
Yeah,
somewhere
they
in
do.
that range.
Yeah.
That's
It's
twice
not
as
that-
expensive, but
yeah, it's
go
worth
ahead and get it.
Well worth it.
Yeah. Less work.
On the slow order, I recently took a trip to Mississippi and watched a train come across, a Norfolk Southern train come across the Mississippi River. It was just barely creeping across the bridge at Vicksburg.
There's steel.
And they're steel. And it was a very slow order going across there. I mean, if he was going 3 miles an hour, that was it. And it wasn't because there was a train coming towards him or whatever. They just got a slow order because that bridge is so old, they just don't want to have any problems with it going across
The
there.
Memphis Bridge is 5 miles an hour.
Yeah.
It's
Steel
slow.
Is the highway
It's steep.
portion of the Vicksburg Railway Bridge still open?
is not. They have closed the automobile lanes down. They don't even use those anymore.
What is that big green colored steel? The Vicksburg Bridge?
There's a train bridge and there's an automobile bridge on I-20. That one's obviously open.
Yeah.
But on the train bridge, there's also an automobile lane on there, but it's closed now. Okay?
It's also great
So
going
it's-
uphill things.
Is that right, Frank?
Yeah.
Okay. From the Louisiana side up to the Mississippi side? Yeah. All right. Dennis?
On your strip wood, did you cut it yourself or order it somewhere?
No, I cut it myself, and I used a chopper to cut, or actually Mike loaned me a sophisticated chopper to cut
He's
it.
talking about, did you buy the strip wood and then cut it, or did you?
No,
I
I
just-
just did, you actually cut it to the size.
After it stained, I bought strip wood at like discount model train or whatever,
okay.
and then I stained it, and then I used a chopper to chop it up to the various lengths for the various size sashes.
Make your own strip wood.
Yeah.
Did
David,
you build it, when you put the vents on the deck, did you right side up or upside down?
upside down, using a square, trying to get it as straight as possible.
Any other questions for Dick? All right, good job. Thank you very much.
Dick.